Ron Howard may have been the red-headed favorite on the Andy Griffith Show, but life behind Mayberry's white picket fences wasn't as perfect as it seemed. While audiences watched a close-knit small-town family on their screens, the actual relationships behind the scenes were much more complicated. Howard did share laughs with Andy Griffith and Don Knotts, but there was one cast member he secretly couldn't stand. And he wasn't the only one. That same person was also the reason behind the one feud even Andy Griffith couldn't overlook. The tension was real, and the resentment ran deep. For decades, this was hidden until now. This is the story of the castmate who stirred conflict behind Mayberry's peaceful appearance, though the Andy Griffith Show is remembered as one of the most wholesome and nostalgic sitcoms in television history. The truth behind its charming southern setting was more complicated. It premiered on CBS on October 3, 1960, and ran until April 1, 1968, airing 249 episodes across 8 seasons, 159 in black and white, and 90 in color. While the series showed a simpler life, the actual production of the show was far from calm. Show began as a backdoor pilot on The Danny Thomas Show, where Andy Griffith first appeared as Sheriff Andy Taylor, widowed lawman, raising his son Opie, played by a young Ron Howard, in the quiet town of Mayberry, North Carolina. Although the setting was made up, Griffith described the show's feeling as a reflection of earlier times, more like the 1930s than the 1960s, when it was actually filmed. It was of a time gone by, Griffith said, capturing what made the show feel special. The characters on the show quickly became beloved icons of American TV. There was Barney Fife, the overly enthusiastic and hilariously clumsy deputy played by Don Knotts. Then came Aunt Beath, the gentle and steady housekeeper played by Frances Bevier. And of course, Opie, the curious yet grounded young boy. Together, they formed a heartwarming family that audiences believed truly cared for one another. Despite the lighthearted tone of the show, the Andy Griffith Show was not free of behind-the-scenes conflict. Off-camera, there were clashes of egos and personalities. One specific feud between Andy Griffith and a fellow actor stayed hidden for many years. It was kept quiet while the show was being filmed, but even Mayberry couldn't keep every secret forever. Still, the show was incredibly successful. It never dropped below 7th place in the Nielsen TV ratings. And in a rare achievement, it ended its final season as the #1 show in America. Only I Love Lucy and Seinfeld have also done that, although Andy Griffith never won an Emmy. His co-stars Don Knotts and Frances Bevier won a combined total of 6. The show's influence continued through spin-offs like Gomer Pyle, USMC, a 1986 reunion movie, and the follow-up series Mayberry, RFD. Even today, fans come together every year to celebrate the show at a festival in Griffith's hometown, Mount Airy, North Carolina. They hold on to the memory of a town that never truly existed, and a show that was far from simple behind the scenes. While the legend of Mayberry continued to charm viewers, one young cast member was quietly getting ready for life beyond fishing, poles and front porches. Ron Howard's background today. Ron Howard is known as a respected Hollywood director, but long before that, he was America's favorite red-headed child star on one of TV's most treasured sitcoms. Born on March 1, 1954, in Duncan, Oklahoma, Ronald William Howard grew up in a showbiz family. His father, Rance Howard, was an actor, writer, and director. He changed his last name from Beckenhalt to Howard for his career. At the time Ron was born, Rance was serving in the U.S. Air Force for 3 years. Ron's mother, Jean Spiegel Howard, was also an actress, making entertainment a family tradition. From the start, Ron came from a mix of German, English, Scottish, Irish, and Dutch roots and American background that matched the wholesome roles he would eventually play. He was partly educated on TV sets like Desilu Studios, where he worked and was tutored, and partly in schools in Burbank, California, such as John Burroughs High School, although he later went to USC's prestigious School of Cinematic Arts. He never graduated. His career had already begun pulling him in another direction. By the age of 5, Ron Howard already had a strong resume. His first credited role was in the film The Journey. Soon, he appeared on shows like The Twilight Zone, The DuPont Show with June Allison, Dennis the Menace, and The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. But in 1960, he got the role that changed his life, Taylor, on The Andy Griffith Show. At the time, he was credited as Ronnie Howard. He played the sheriff's young son for all 8 seasons of the show. Looking back on his early days on set, Howard once shared that he was focused on a toy turtle he had to pretend was Raylan dead. I remember him looking at that little turtle and talking to me about how it was kind of funny to have to pretend that it was dead, he said. So I recall just a very relaxed first impression. That mix of warmth and quiet humor defined the tone of the show. Although it aired in the 1960s, The Andy Griffith Show leaned into old-fashioned Americana. It was timeless and full of nostalgia, showing the comfort of a simpler life with Don Knotts' unforgettable Barney Fife, Frances Bevier's wise Aunt Bee, and other memorable townspeople. The show became a fixture in American homes. It never won an Emmy for Best Comedy Series, but it was nominated 3 times, and its stars Knotts and Bevier won 6 acting Emmys. Ron Howard's career didn't stop after the show ended. It only grew in 1974. He became famous again for playing Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. What started as a short segment on Love, American Style turned into a hit series. Howard's wholesome character balanced perfectly with Henry Winkler's cool street-smart, Fonzie. Their chemistry, both on-screen and off, helped make the show a pop culture legend. Even during Happy Days, Howard was already thinking about directing. His first movie as a director was Grand Theft Auto in 1977, a low-budget comedy action film he co-wrote with his father. He got the chance thanks to a deal with producer Roger Corman. Howard would act in Eat My Dust in exchange for directing his own film. That movie marked a turning point in his career. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Howard directed TV movies for NBC, including the 1980 film Skyward, which starred screen icon Bette Davis. But his big directorial break came in 1982 with Night Shift, a wild comedy starring Shelley Long, Michael Keaton, and Henry Winkler. It introduced Howard as a serious creative talent behind the camera. From there, his career took off. In 1984, he directed Splash, a romantic comedy fantasy film starring Tom Hanks, Daryl Hannah, Eugene Levy, and John Candy. It was a huge box and critical success, proving that Howard could create films that mixed heart, humor, and wide appeal. It all started with a toy turtle and the role of Opie Taylor. But Ron Howard was never just a child actor. He was a future storyteller in the making. Once he moved behind the camera, Hollywood took notice and never looked away. But before he won awards, broke box office records, or gained respect as a director, Howard had already learned the ropes on a set that wasn't nearly as peaceful as it looked. Behind Mayberry's slow, gentle charm, real tensions, brewed tensions no camera ever showed. On-set tensions at the Andy Griffith showed the drama on the Andy Griffith Show wasn't just what aired on TV. Some of the most emotional conflicts took place off camera, especially between two of the show's biggest stars. Andy Griffith and Frances Bevier were television legends famous for their loving portrayals of Sheriff Andy Taylor and Aunt Bee. On screen, they looked like the perfect pair, but off-screen, their relationship was anything but friendly. Similar to the widely reported strained friendship between Zelena Gomez and Francia Raisa, the tension between Griffith and Bevier added a dramatic, hidden layer to a show that otherwise felt light and warm. Fans and entertainment historians have long been fascinated by their behind-the-scenes feud. The tension didn't come from one argument. It was a deep and ongoing conflict, based on differences in personality and work ethic. It wasn't just a small disagreement. It was a silent feud that continued long after the show ended. This unspoken clash, rumored for years but rarely confirmed, became part of the show's deeper, more complicated legacy. It adds a layer of realism to a series known for its rosy nostalgia. At the center of the show was Andy Griffith, who played Sheriff Andy Taylor with a calm voice and gentle strength. He was a widowed father, a wise lawman, and a moral guide for Mayberry, solving problems and parenting with kindness and humor. His charm gave the show its tone, warm, grounded, and quietly heroic. Alongside him was Frances Bevier as Aunt Bea, strict but loving figure who held the Taylor household together. She wasn't just a caretaker, she was the emotional anchor of the show. With her comforting meals, gentle scoldings, and old-fashioned advice, Bevier created a character who became a cultural symbol, the perfect TV aunt. Together, their characters showed viewers an ideal version of home and community, but behind the camera, things were much rockier. According to classic country music, the conflict between Griffith and Bevier came from the way they approached their work and each other. Bevier, a very private person, stayed distant from the cast. While Griffith was friendly and outgoing, Bevier preferred to be alone. To some, she seemed cold or distant. But it wasn't just her quiet personality that caused issues, it was her high standards. She took her job seriously and wanted others to do the same. Ron Howard, who played Opie, has often spoken about how much Andy Griffith's leadership helped the show stay together, as deeper tensions quietly lingered. However, Howard Morris, who played Ernest T-Base and directed several episodes, once described working with Bevier as like navigating a landmine. A seemingly simple direction, such as asking her to move a few inches for camera framing, could trigger strong resistance. She was particular about her space and presentation, and any challenge to that was unwelcome. Her precision, while admirable, sometimes led to uncomfortable standoffs with her colleagues. In an interview cited by Cheat Sheet, Griffith himself shared one memorable and painful attempt at reconciliation. He had once visited Bevier unannounced at her home, hoping to mend fences. The gesture backfired. Bevier, fiercely protective of her privacy, was not pleased by the surprise visit. Rather than healing old wounds, the encounter deepened them, reinforcing the wall between them. But as life has a way of humbling even the most resolute hearts, change eventually came. Near the end of her life, Bevier was battling cancer, a fight that brought with it moments of reflection. She picked up the phone and called Griffith. After years of tension, she was ready to speak honestly. Griffith later recalled the moment. saying, "Bavier apologized sincerely. I'm sorry we didn't get along better, it was my fault." She admitted to being difficult, acknowledged his leadership on the show, and credited him with much of its success. It was a powerful gesture when that finally put to rest years of unresolved emotion. Frances Bavier passed away in 1989 at the age of 86. Though raised in New York City, she spent her final years in North Carolina, the very place her character Aunt Bee had lived on screen. She retired from acting in 1972 and embraced a quieter life in Siler City, a small town where she found peace and connection. Locals recalled her as private but kind of far cry from the misunderstood persona she carried in Hollywood. End of her life, Bavier struggled with serious health problems, particularly heart-related complications. She spent her final days under medical care at Chatham Hospital. Just a week before her passing, she was released from the coronary care unit, though her condition remained fragile. While her official cause of death was never publicly confirmed, many believe it was due to her ongoing heart issues. Even in her final chapter, she maintained the same dignity and reserve that had defined her life and career. Andy Griffith would also live to the age of 86, according to CNN Entertainment. He passed away quietly at his home on Roanoke Island, North Carolina, early one Tuesday morning. The specific illness that led to his death was not disclosed, but his passing marked a deep loss in the world of entertainment. Griffith's family released a statement confirming he had been buried in Roanoke Island, his beloved sanctuary, and the place where he'd found personal peace. The passing of both stars marked the close of an era, but it also reminded fans of the deeper stories that exist behind television's polished surface. Even though Andy Griffith and Frances Bavier spent many years at odds, they eventually found the grace to reconcile. In the end, it wasn't about who was right or wrong, it was about two artists recognizing the humanity in each other and choosing to let go. The legacy they left behind is one of talent, heart, and ultimately forgiveness. And while the Andy Griffith Show chapter closed in Ron Howard's early life, there was another story which was quietly unfolding, a match made in heaven. There's a kind of love that doesn't make headlines every day. It doesn't scream or demand the spotlight. It just endures quietly, steadily, decade after decade. That's the love story of Ron and Cheryl Howard. Hollywood has no shortage of whirlwind romances, public heartbreaks, or headline-grabbing flings. But in the middle of all that noise, Ron and Cheryl built something rare, something real. On June 7, 2025, they celebrated 50 years of marriage, half a century of growing, dreaming, building, and still choosing each other every single day. Ron marked the golden anniversary with a photo of the two of them standing on the beach at sunset. No big production, no red carpet, just the warm glow of twilight and two people who've spent most of their lives in sync. He said he was grateful for the family, the memories, and the journey, describing their love as a river ride through calm waters and tricky rapids. He credited their success to a simple secret: they just kept paddling. They were only 16 when they met, two teenagers in California with bright eyes and bigger dreams. He had freckles and that famous red hair. She had a quiet strength and the kind of presence you don't forget. He always said there was never anyone else. She was it. Their first date was classic 1970s romance. Ron picked Cheryl up in his mint green Volkswagen Beetle, took her to the movies, and then they grabbed pizza. The car was nothing fancy, but it got them where they needed to go. Years later, Ron would laugh and say, "It still runs great. So do we." 5 years after that date, they stood in Burbank, California, and said, "I do." It was June 1975. The guest list included friends, family, and a few Happy Days co-stars, including the late Tom Bosley. Ron had just started on the sitcom a year before, and life was moving fast. But he knew Cheryl was his constant. And yet, she didn't say yes right away. In fact, it took 3 proposals. Cheryl, always thoughtful and intentional, told him she wasn't ready, not yet. She had things she wanted to do: school life, a future she could shape for herself before tying it to his. Their daughter Bryce would later describe her mom as a force of nature, the kind of woman who kept everyone grounded. Even Ron. Looking back, Cheryl said it was Ron's love for storytelling that drew her in. It still does. Together, they raised 4 children, including Bryce and Paige, who followed them into the world of film. But the Howards were never just a Hollywood family. They were a team, a unit. Cheryl once wrote that their shared passion, 4 stories, brought them together, and it was clear that love became the greatest story they ever told. Their daughters often described Cheryl as the heart of the family. Paige once said that trying to explain how much they loved their mother brought tears to her eyes. She called Cheryl the stars, the sun, and the moon, their guiding light. Still, it wasn't always easy. Ron admits it takes more than just love. Communication matters. So does luck. But most of all, he says, you have to grow together. You have to change, adapt, let each other evolve, and keep finding your way back to the middle. That's how their chemistry stayed strong. That's how their lives remained aligned, even as their worlds expanded. Ron says he feels supremely fortunate not just for their love, but for the lessons, the blessings, and the quiet understanding that has carried them through 5 decades. From late nights with newborns to early call times on set, from heartbreak to celebration, they've lived it all together. For their anniversary in 2023, Ron surprised Cheryl by taking her for a drive in that same mint green VW Beguias, the one from their very first date. They took the long way, let the wind in, and remembered where it all began. No fancy restaurants, no champagne toasts, just the road, the engine's soft hum, and 50 years of memories between them. Hollywood often forgets the quiet kind of love, patient loves, the kind built not in fairy tales, but in kitchens and minivans and sleepy good nights. But Ron and Cheryl didn't forget. They've lived it, protected it, nurtured it. Their love story isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It's steady, rooted, eternal, and after 50 years, it's still just getting good. Ron Howard's controversies, very few actors are able to leave a lasting mark both in front of the camera and behind it. But Ron Howard is one of the rare few who did it better than almost anyone else. He's part of a very small club that includes big names like Clint Eastwood, Greta Gerwig, Jordan Peele, Bradley Cooper, and George Clooney. But unlike most of them, Howard is more famous for the movies he's directed than the ones he's acted in. It all started with television in the 1960s and 70s. His face was everywhere. As Little Opie in The Andy Griffith Show, and later as Richie Cunningham in Happy Days. Howard became one of America's most loved child stars. But behind that friendly face was someone watching and learning, preparing for something much bigger. In 1977, he took his shot at directing with a wild little film called Grand Theft Auto. It had nothing to do with the video game. It was fast, messy, and full of heart. From that point on, Howard became a regular name in Hollywood. But it wasn't an overnight rise. He had to stumble a few times. In the 1980s, he directed Splash, a fun romantic fantasy with Tom Hanks, and Willow, a bold adventure story. They showed his talent, but not everyone took him seriously yet. The 90s didn't help much either. A few of his films landed flat, and some critics began to doubt if he'd ever deliver something great. Then came the new millennium, and with it, How the Grinch Stole Christmas and, just a year later, A Beautiful Mind. This was the moment everything changed. A Beautiful Mind told the real-life story of John Nash, a brilliant mathematician who battled mental illness. It was powerful, moving, and unforgettable. The film starred Russell Crowe, Jennifer Connelly, Ed Harris, and Christopher Plummer. Long before the Oscars, people already felt it would sweep, and it did. Howard walked away with Best Director, and the film took home Best Picture, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay. But not everyone was clapping. Some were angry. Important details about Nash's life had been left out: his bisexuality, a child he had outside his marriage. The fact he didn't support that child, all missing. Critics accused Howard of softening the truth. He later admitted those parts were removed to focus on the heart of the story. But that didn't stop the backlash. What bothered Howard most wasn't the criticism, was how it started to affect Nash personally. That, he said, was crossing the line. Who did Ron Howard utterly despise? For someone who spent nearly 7 decades in the spotlight, Ron Howard has built a reputation as Hollywood's calmest storm. He's steady, soft-spoken, the kind of director studios trust when they don't want drama, just results. But even a man like that has lines he won't let others cross. And in the last few years, those lines have gotten clearer. Howard once turned J.D. Vance's best-selling memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, into a high-profile Netflix film. It was a project Howard approached with care, focusing on the grit and resilience in Vance's upbringing. At the time, politics didn't dominate their conversations. Vance wasn't a senator then. He wasn't even involved in politics. That suited Howard just fine. He wasn't looking for a policy partner. He was looking for a story, but the man Howard once tried to understand has since taken a different path. Vance is now a politician, possibly on the verge of becoming vice president, and his current rhetoric. It's a world apart from the person Howard once knew. The filmmaker has made it clear, without any dramatic outbursts, that he's both surprised and disappointed by what Vance has become. Howard isn't one to lash out publicly. That's never been his style. But this time, something cracked. For someone who has spent his career avoiding controversy, his recent tone carried weight. The shift wasn't just political, it was personal. Not unlike another moment in his life. Many decades earlier, when a seemingly sweet co-star made life on set far from wholesome, long before A Beautiful Mind or Apollo 13, Ron Howard was a child star on the Andy Griffith Show, America's favorite feel-good series. On screen, it was all folksy charm. But behind the scenes, things weren't always sunny in Mayberry. Most fans assumed the cast got along just as well off camera as they did on it. But there was one cast member, young Ron, dreaded sharing scenes with Frances Bevere, better known as Aunt B. She was stern, cold, and never treated him like the adored kid America thought he was. While the audience saw a loving aunt fussing over her nephew, Howard saw something else, entirely someone rigid, demanding, and almost impossible to connect with. Even decades later, when asked about his time on the show, Howard never pretended. Aunt Bee was his favorite memory. Back then, of course, Howard didn't speak out, he was just a boy playing Opie. He kept his head down, did his job, and smiled through it. But there were moments when that smile slipped, like during the infamous Pickle Story episode, where Opie had to devour jars of Aunt Bee's famously awful pickles. What audiences didn't know was that Ron absolutely hated pickles, eating them over and over for multiple takes. Pure misery. And working opposite Bavure during that scene. The emotional cherry on top. That tension stayed buried for years, never fully addressed. But those who knew the cast behind the curtain would later confirm it. Howard and Bavure simply didn't get along. She wasn't cruel, but she was icy. She never warmed to him. And as he grew older, that distance didn't fade from memory. It lingered not in bitterness, but in clarity. Howard had learned early what it felt like to work with someone who made you feel small. So when J.D. Vance began speaking in ways that clashed with the vulnerable story Howard once tried to share, it triggered something old. This wasn't just politics, it was about trust, empathy, and being blindsided by someone you once thought you understood. He didn't have to call anyone out. The silence between his lines said enough. Years earlier, Howard had faced criticism for A Beautiful Mind, a film swept the Oscars, but it also drew backlash for omitting major truths about its subject. John Nash. It was a reminder that telling someone else's story, especially someone complicated, comes with risk. If you soften the edges, someone will notice. If you tell too much, someone will protest. Either way, the storyteller carries the burden. And now, watching Vance's political rise, Howard is carrying another. Not because he made a bad movie, but because the man at its center became someone unrecognizable. It's the same sting he felt decades ago, when the warmth he had to fake for Aunt Bee never matched the chill she sent his way. Howard's takeaway: don't assume what's behind the smile. A cozy script, a charming persona, a best-selling book, none of it guarantees authenticity. People can shift. They can disappoint you. They can rewrite their own stories in ways that leave you questioning why you ever tried to help them tell it in the first place. Still, Howard isn't bitter. He's evolved from an uncomfortable child actor to a director with Oscars on his shelf and decades of trust banked in Hollywood. He's learned to pick his moments. And this moment, this political one, was worth speaking on. He didn't rant. He didn't attack. He reminded people of one thing: watch closely, think critically, and for the love of everything, vote. Because the stories we believe today shape the headlines we wake up to tomorrow. And if anyone understands how easily a character can fool an audience, it's Ron Howard. He's seen it play out on screen, on set, and now, on the national stage. What Ron Howard movie have you seen? Let us know in the comments below. Also like, subscribe, and click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.